says no one's here. So I'm going to guess. No one is ready for us. Oh, 5 people. Ready for us to be on time for once.
All right.
Look at this.
Whoever the
Do you
5
think we're
people
at
are,
the
I'm very
time
impressed.
where we can
I think
talk?
once it shows people, that's
Okay.
when there's eyes. That's
Yeah.
what it is.
Well, welcome everyone to our Word Nerds Live Book Club chat. We are discussing The Emotional Craft of Fiction by Donald Maass. I was wondering if he had a middle initial there. He doesn't.
Why don't you call him Donald J. Maass?
I always want to call him.
So we've been having a few of these throughout the past few months, and right now we're discussing chapter 5. So if you read that, great. If not, we'll kind of talk about the ideas as a whole that he discusses, so you can always chime in even if you haven't read. But yes, that's our plan for tonight. It might be a bit of a shorter chat since it was just one chapter that we read, the emotional plot that Donald talked to us about. So to start off, I thought I would ask, in general, when you are plotting out, like I know some people are pantsers, but like when you come up with your idea or you start to plot, do you plan out your main character's inner emotional journey at the same time that you develop the outer plot, or does one come before the other, or like how do you handle that?
Subconsciously, initially, like it's not something I'm actively thinking of through the plot. Once I have like the full like story, I'll usually like have some inkling of it that's kind of come together naturally and can build it out from there as I flesh out the plot, would be my guess.
I think for me, he talks like very early on in the chapter about this like inner need and yearning that drives the thing. And I think I do typically know what that is, but usually I have to write like the whole book before I can have a really good idea of what that arc actually looks like and how I can make it look really good. So I know what the yearning is, but the whole arc usually takes me a bit more time.
Yeah, I find it's pretty intrinsically linked with the rest of the plot for me. So it comes about pretty naturally, but there's still like a lot of refining, just like there is with the rest of the plot. But I did find like a lot of the exercises, especially early in the chapter, I was like, oh, I'm pretty sure I'm doing that in my opening scene. Like, so I think a lot of it just kind of naturally comes into the plot for me.
Nice. Yeah, I would agree that I zero in on the yearning or like the want or the need for the character pretty early on. But some of the exercises that he was talking about throughout, I was like, oh, I would like to do this when I revise this draft that is never ending, but I will end it at some point.
It cannot last forever. Unless.
And also, if I didn't mention, if you're new here in the comments, feel free to answer our questions as well and ask questions and such. And Gridflawed says, I'll jot down any emotions if I know while plotting how the characters will react, but for the most part, that comes while writing. Yeah, I like that. Reminds me of like when I am getting into a scene, I need to figure out what the emotional entry point is of what my character is thinking or like what the past chapter kind of influenced on them. So yeah, I agree with that. Jotting down and then kind of figuring it out as you go. Nice. So in the opening, Maass kind of talks about heart values and how you can make people connect with characters. He lists heart values as compassion, insight, a commitment to justice, family, love, steadfastness, sacrifice, selflessness. And he argues hook readers faster and harder than survival, striving for success, desiring fame, alienation, or aloneness. I was wondering what your take on that was. Do you agree with him? Do you kind of see that you naturally go towards one of those when you're writing your characters?
What page was that on again?
Oh, sorry, that was page 88.
88. Okay. I knew I had
Go
it.
get my book.
But
I'm sorry to all you audiobook readers. That's not helpful.
Yeah, I don't know. I I can see how that would maybe hook someone faster, just knowing like, oh, they're a good person. He references multiple times like Katniss reaching for her sister, and I can see how that's a very hooky thing. But I also, on a personal level, I'm very compelled by a character who just like wants to be the best at something, or like just wants to succeed so badly. I find that, especially someone pursuing publishing, you know, I find that a very endearing trait for someone to have.
Yeah. I feel like in the previous chapter where he brought up like having like a moral good for the character or whatever, like I think the flaw in his like kind of like logic and reasoning is that he always just like goes too deep into it, that like they have to have this good thing. Like he'll like start off with a good point, like because I highlighted above that in the first paragraph of that page where he's like a simple reason to care about a character, which is to say apprehend something good about them as soon as we meet. And I think that's more important, that like you can see some like glimmer of like a good thing in them. I don't think they need to have like these like moral heart values or whatever. And I even also like later on when he's talking about like capturing the idea of human longing, I like highlighted that and I was like, I think that's more important than the values. Like seeing people long for something and having that glimmer of goodness is more important than like feeling like they are some morally good character in some way.
He even says a bit earlier on page 84, he says the search for peace is satisfied when a protagonist feels happy, but it isn't finished until a hero is also happy with the world. And that's another part that I was like, I actually wrote IDK on it because I don't know, the world's pretty messed up. That seems like asking for a lot of my characters at this point in time.
Yeah, I had a similar thought. I think when he was phrasing it differently, but the same idea of like, oh, to reconcile oneself to be happy is a primary human need. To transcend oneself, though, it's a divine attainment. And I'm like, my characters are not divine. Like, but hello, Mr. Rosary, welcome. What did you think? I liked the Katniss example. I've read people's take on the Katniss example many different times of how it is a good emotional hook, and also introduces, you know, the intrigue of the world. Thoughts on the Twilight example?
Okay, so the main thing I wrote here is like, now knowing Twilight far more, and Bella more than I did when I first read this opening. This is so like not the point of the sex, like any of this, but like just her being described as someone who loves the heat and the sun and a vigorous, sprawling city made me laugh out loud just out of nowhere. I'm like, I don't know who they're trying to make me think Bella is, but I know her better than she knows herself at this point. I'm saying it. Anyways, not relevant to writing, but I also felt like he dug a little too deep on her. Like this is just like teen melodrama and not necessarily all of the like underlying things.
I don't think it's some clue to her like inner selflessness, although I do think Stephenie Meyer wants you to see Bella as a very selfless person, but I do think it resonates with like anyone who's been a teen before, like, oh, my parents are just so worried about me and I wish they wouldn't be. Like, I've got this covered. And like that to me, as an adult looking at it now, is like, I remember thinking like that.
And I also like that I think he makes a point about how like it's really like it's setting the reader up for the journey that she's going to go on. Like she's telling it in past tense. You know, and so like it's like this reflection back that she's like hinting at all the ways she's going to grow and the things she's going to find in Forks, even if like at that point in time she didn't know it.
I do think it's interesting too that he says this is how we meet Bella and this is not the first chapter of Twilight. Like, there's a prologue that is her thinking about death, which I think has always spoken to me a lot more. Both as a teen and as an adult. She's like, I'd never given much thought to how I would die, I think is the first one. And that to me as a teen, I was like, girl, all I'm thinking about is death. Tell me what you're thinking about now.
Welcome, Joe Catherine. Belle says, I feel there's a big difference between happiness and being at some level of peace. Kind of circling back to when he was talking about
that for sure.
And Griswold says, I didn't think it was the best choice. I'm assuming Twilight. I also laughed at her loving the sun. Who's that? Do we know her?
Who is she?
Yeah.
I was really glad that the Hunger Games example was in there, because even before the excerpt, like I was thinking about the Hunger Games when he was talking about like all the inner emotional plot, because I think that's something Suzanne Collins does really, really well.
Definitely.
I was really glad to have like two examples that I was this familiar with, especially because I feel like a lot of this got like really bogged down in him telling stories about his life that I did not care about, in a way that made me feel like maybe you don't understand these things you're trying to teach me. Like, of course your wife has a card on her. Come on.
That was my first thought when he was like, I forgot the wallet. So I was like, did your wife not bring any money?
I know, and he like had that thought about like, she doesn't when I bring my money. I was like, who does that? Who's like, oh, they've got the wallet.
And like, if his son was little, and he emphasizes that he is privileged boomer white man. So this is like back before, I don't know. I also didn't love the story about how him losing his temper gets his kids to open up. I'm like, they fear you. This isn't good. This isn't what I'm supposed to be taking away from this conversation.
I did.
Yeah, one thought I had just about like the book in general, because I really liked this chapter. Like, I think it was my favorite chapter so far. I think there were some really good points in it, but it's like it could have been half as long. Like, I felt like he would like be making the same point over and over again to make himself like sound really smart. And it's like, okay, let's move it along.
Like you are saying some very smart things. Like, dwell on.
Yeah.
I don't need the flower language as you make the point.
Belle, 2016 was when this book was published, so probably written slightly before that.
Ago.
Yeah. Sorry, you were going to say, Megan.
I do really like the example, because I agree about the screaming at your children and the wallet examples. I did really like the part where he's talking about the train and how the midpoint of your book can be like this metaphorical going in the tunnel and it being stressful, or like soaring up over. Like, I really liked that, and I thought that was a good metaphor. That was like, wow, this should have been the visible bridge high point of your chapter.
I highlighted the part about the bridge where he's said something about like, oh, all that came before is falling behind, all that lies ahead still is indistinct. I thought that was really interesting, like, and just like a good reminder that like at your midpoint, like there should still be some unknowns ahead, you know?
Yes. And Griswold's comment made me laugh. I wrote a note about how Dad saved the day with Mom's credit card. Not this week, dude. So something that Maass talks about is like making sure your opening is like intriguing, but also like involved. I think he uses the word involved. How well do you get to know a character before you start writing them? Like, do you purposely set out of like, how can I make this character intriguing and make people want to be involved in their story from the beginning, or do you go about it a different way?
I think there's always something about the character that's intriguing to me, and I'm trying to get that across. And there's definitely like, even before I start drafting, like there are certain emotional points I'm really excited to hit in their arc. So it's something I definitely think about early on. Yeah.
Dealing with that feels very similar to one of the things I wrote down is his note on if you're feeling bored or impatient while you're writing it, those are the points that your reader's going to feel it as well. And like, if I'm intrigued enough by a character to start their story, that's already part of it, and I don't need to overthink that until I get to revisions usually.
Sure.
I think, I always know at their core what's like interesting, like what's going to make the story, I guess, kind of like Emma said. It does take me a while though, I feel like, to get their mannerisms just right. I feel like I don't really nail those down in a compelling way until probably the third or fourth draft, if I'm being honest. I have a hard time figuring out exactly what I want a main character's mannerisms to be.
Yeah. I feel like I have a good idea of like the character, but the first draft is a lot of like telling their emotions and mannerisms and things.
Yeah.
And figuring out better ways to show it in a second draft.
Yeah, and I also feel like I kind of go in with an idea of what I want the character to be like, and then as I'm writing, I'm like, this decision they made doesn't really align with that. Do I want them to still make this decision? How do I make them align with that or not align? So forth. Yeah. Belle says, I think for me, it's more about find the voice of the narrator, that elusive voice. Once I have that, I think my characters are fine. Nice. And Griswold says on page 99 about the midpoint, rather, it's a midpoint, a deeper and more harrowing look down an abyss. It's neither here nor there. It's worse. I never looked at the midpoint that way. I didn't either, but at that last line, I was like, ooh, that's a good line, Donald.
Like, okay, Donald.
So I guess kind of transitioning into that, what did you find interesting or helpful in this chapter?
I really liked his part. The longer a reader has to chew on the story, the more it works into their memory, which isn't like a big groundbreaking thing, but like it makes a lot of sense of like, oh yeah, those are the stories that like stick with you and tend to get recommended more, and like the ones where it's hard to pin down how to do that, but it was like, oh, that's awesome.
It ties into what some of the things I was thinking about. Like, I feel like this chapter made me reflect a lot on like books I've read and how I felt about them, and how what he's talking about here influenced the way I felt about a book. Because yeah, I thought about like all the books that I read that I enjoy, but then I can't remember anything about them, versus books that like I actually had to like chew on a little bit, even if I read it fast, like that it actually caused me to like feel, and those books stick with me longer. This chapter also made me think a lot about the YA boom in like the 2010s, and the flaws that a lot of books had at that time, and like what the books that were really successful and that I feel like stand up over time versus books that maybe haven't so much and that I've totally forgotten about. Because I think there was a lot of the writing advice, especially in the YA writing community then, was like, when he talks about the opening scene in the first chapter, like a lot of like, something big has to happen. You need to start, your opening chapter needs to be further into the book, so that it's something exciting. And I feel like a lot of times, like the emotional investment in the character was like lost because of that, because it was like, we got to throw you into this like scene or something,
especially in the like dystopian boom, like it's always very dramatic.
And the characters were all the same, so it was like, why do I care about them? Like, it's another like girl who thinks there's nothing wrong with her world, and now she's going to meet this boy and realize that something is wrong, and so like there was starting to become a point where there was like no reason to be emotionally involved, because it was like, I've read this character 100 times. So it made me think a lot about about some of the like flawed writing and publishing advice of the time, and how that affected like some of the quality of the books going down over time.
I thought it was interesting. He mentions I think this is the first chapter he's done this. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think anyone will remember though. He references 3 different like books or like tools for writers in this. So he references
he does.
Rainey's first page checklist, Noah Lukeman's the first 5 pages, and I don't know where he said, but I know it's James Scott Bell's like.
Oh yeah.
I think it's James Scott Bell, Write Your Novel from the Middle. Which I've read that one and I really like it, but I do feel like I would want to go and look at those other ones. I've never read the first 5 pages, but it would have been a long, long time ago.
Yeah, I think you're right in saying that it's one of the few times that he's mentioned that they're writing advice books by name. And Griswold says, it makes me think I'm being too nice at the midpoint, which will have to change. Yeah, I think a lot of this book summarizes up to like, Leah, you got to be mean to your characters more.
I love the whole like write your book from the middle one. Like it all hinges on this like mirror moment that I think is so fascinating. And like, I love when books do that. And I notice it every time now where I'm like, oh no, things are about to get really bad. He has this line too on page 99, talking about this like moment of suspension that happens kind of in these mirror moments. And he says, where is it? He's talking about not exactly a mirror moment. It doesn't have to be a good Lord, what have I become? How did this happen? Or I've got to change. Rather, you could have a midpoint, a deeper and more harrowing look down an abyss. Neither here nor there, it's worse. And then below it, he says, when you've done something wrong, the most horrible thing of all is to be left alone with yourself.
Yes.
Oh, I'm going to use that. For sure. I really like kind of all of the exercises throughout the book.
Mm-hmm.
At least one of them, there's a write down this idea that you have for this thing. Now cross it out and let's think about it a little deeper. And I think that advice really works for me because I always am like, this is a great idea. I'm going to just full speed ahead, go with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very helpful for me to be reminded, like, and what if we cross that one out and see what the second idea is?
And Griswold says, favorite part of the chapter is emotional mastery number 13, page 94. So that first bullet is
it's a cross that out one.
Mentally go to your opening moment or what seems to be a good place to start your story. It's in your mind for a reason. Yeah, I really struggle with writing openings, and so like anytime that people are like, here's advice, I'm like, okay, I'll try that.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I struggle with it because there's been so much advice, and particularly that like starting further and making it dramatic, like that stuff was so drilled into us a decade ago, and like I don't like them, but like all of that stuff is just in my head still.
True. Yeah.
I felt like I got really good at that. And now that I write books where it doesn't necessarily make sense to start like that, I have a super hard time with beginnings. Whereas the first 5 to 7 years of writing, I would have told you like beginnings are the best part for me. I always keep my first page exactly the same. Like I knew that formula.
You're like, I got this.
Yeah.
Crazy Foxy says, I've studied Maass's writing in the 21st century and many other craft books. What I'm struggling with is information overload. Yeah. How do you guys handle all of these craft systems books? Pick and choose?
Megan?
Yeah, I was like, this is a question for Megan.
Yeah, I think I've gotten pretty good at knowing, oh, I like this. I think this will work for me. Oh, I don't like this. I don't think this will work for me. And also just being fine with skimming stuff that it's like, this isn't helpful or this is repetitive, because a lot of these books are written for beginners. They just are.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm not sure how helpful that is. If there are exercises, I always pay extra close attention to those, because I think that's where I get the most value is, well, what are they trying to make me do to think a little bit differently? And if I hate them all, then I just won't do them. You know, people love, where is it? People love the anatomy of story. There's like 3 exercises in this whole book that I like and that work for me. And the book is so long, and there's like, this is the ultimate information overload book in my opinion. But for some people, it's a Bible. Like, it's perfect. It's exactly what they need. And so it really is just find what works for you, be willing to skim the rest, check them out from your library before you buy yourself a copy. Yeah, don't like waste your money on them if there's a chance you're going to hate it. Like, I buy the ones that I like. Yeah.
Belle says, I think you have to take what either resonates or makes the most sense for you or whatever project you're working on and go with that. Leave the rest for another project. That's true. Yeah. Sometimes you read advice and
or mock the rest on the internet.
Right away.
It's fine.
Perfect.
True. And Griswold says, I don't try to do everything all at once. Yeah. I focus on one thing I know I want to make stronger, and when I'm comfortable with what I've written, I'll add to it where needed. That's solid advice. Lisa Cron has a bunch of good exercises too. I'm not familiar with this. Lisa Cron, thank you for the recommendation. Oh, Story Genius. Okay. I haven't read Story Genius, but the minute you said Story Genius, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm also a huge fan of writing in your books and reading your writing books when you're in between drafts or if you're about to start a new draft. I think it can be really helpful. One of the things I've really enjoyed about rereading this is that there are notes in here from multiple other books that I've worked on in the past. Like, oh, try to just throw this in with this character here, or try this over here. And reading it now while I'm working on an R&R, I'm thinking of like, oh, well, maybe I could use this one here. And I think it's a fun, like almost story journal to see all of the different notes I've left for dead projects.
Nice. Did you have any aha moments or instances where you disagreed? I know we talked a little bit about some disagrees, but if you had others to share.
He was losing me a bit on the like plotting the books with no plot. Because like at first it felt like he was talking about literary books, but then when he gave the example of the Paper Magician, I'm like, I understand what the plot of this without having read the book. Like there's a plot. It's just like slower. Like so I wasn't really sure where he was trying to go. Of like, because it all kind of came back to like making smaller things important to your characters and how those things drive. I don't know, pretending like some books have no plot that are still, I don't know, it seemed weird to me. Like there's a plot.
You see, yeah, how it's just a different format. I think it's not so like, I did read The Paper Magician. I had no memory of it until he started describing it. And I was like, wait a minute, I did read it. It was like a very popular indie book, like years.
I remember the cover of it.
Yeah,
because like he made me like curious about it. I'm like, this doesn't sound like a book with no plot in the way I think about books with no plot.
I think now it would be described more as a romantasy, like which just has different plotting rules than a proper fantasy might.
Did you like it? Is it worth reading?
It's been so long. I remember I read at least 2 of them, but I possibly read all of them. I got like a month of Kindle Unlimited or something and just like tore through them, but it has not stuck with me enough to have recognized the title.
I haven't read it, but it's on my TBR, and like he said the title, I was like, that vaguely sounds like a book I've heard of, and then he started describing it. I was like, oh yes, okay, I remember the premise of this book.
Yeah, I remember enjoying it enough to read more than one of them.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll go. No, you go ahead.
Oh, just speaking of kind of like romance, I go back and forth on how I view his view of romance, like the genre. Because like at times he's like acknowledging that like, yeah, they really do emotions well. And then other times he's like, but it's just the same old formula over and over again. And I'm just like, sir, romance I think is really hard to write well and can also be really engaging.
I do feel like he talked with so much respect for YA. I was like, wow, yeah, look at this guy go. And then in the next breath, he was like, and romance is the same old thing.
Yep.
Wait a minute.
Like, in a way, it is, which is why it's so valuable to study. And like,
that's what he's trying to say.
Yeah.
Because it feels like the romance genre is all just like a big exclamation point on the points he's trying to make of like why making those things feel important can drive a whole book.
Which is why I find it weird that he kind of almost like he does do some examples for romance, but not a lot.
No.
Oh.
I'm gonna guess he doesn't read a ton of it.
At the end of the day, so many of his examples feel like old man examples. Like even the people going to Hollywood on the bus thing.
Oh yeah.
Of like there's like this one throwaway line about like, so the girl character was 21 and she hadn't started plucking her eyebrows yet, which to me just felt like someone so out of touch with young women. Of like, I don't remember when they were set and whatever, but like, oh, she was too young then to start. Like, no, she would have like already plucked her eyebrows to death by that point if this was something they were doing. Yeah. Like being 21 isn't some young naive girl who's just discovering fashion as she's on her way to Hollywood. No.
Belle makes a good point. Hero's journey is formulaic, like hello. Yeah, it is.
Mm-hmm. And he even references the hero's journey at some
Yeah.
point in this chapter.
Early on, yeah.
When he's talking about like you follow the plot and now you need to get the inner journey going.
Mhm.
I really liked this one exercise in Emotional Mastery 14, where he's talking about the emotional midpoint, specifically the part where he says, at the midpoint, write down your protagonist's view of herself prior to this time. What about that view is no longer true? Who must your protagonist now become? What is she lacking and utterly unable to achieve? And I particularly like that, like what does my character think about themselves? A lot of times I tend to have my characters thinking a lot about like what's happening, who are they talking to, how are those people interacting, and not as much like self-reflection. And I think that's like a very critical part of things.
And Grisald says, what did you think of the catalyst and catharsis section, page 105? He lost me there. I don't have any cathartic scenes. I'm curious, do you? I also found that interesting when he was talking about the catharsis, because I'd imagine there's like intense moments in books that I write where like the characters kindly confront an issue directly head on. But yeah, I don't know necessarily that they have a cathartic release.
Yeah,
always.
I don't know that I think of it that way. So it was, I didn't quite wrap my head around it either. Of like, that's not how I see it, but I'm sure there are examples.
I like these moments, you know, like in the romance novel, someone says something that's true, but they shouldn't have said. Or, you know, in a horror novel, the main character gets the chance to show like maybe they can actually survive this, but are they tapping into something that's not a good side of themselves? Like, I really like those kinds of moments, which I think are kind of catalyst and catharsis, how he's discussing them.
Belle asks, does he mean coming to some kind of resolution rather than just having to live in the moment due to the plot stuff? I'm not sure.
Yeah, kind of. I think he's also talking about like not just coming to some kind of resolution, but causing some sort of blow up that will then lead to the resolution.
Yeah, I think of it as like whatever like emotion your character's been like bottling up throughout the book, like finally comes out.
Yeah, you could think of catalyst as rising action.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like I ask this question every time, and every time the answer is like, haven't yet, but want to. But have any of you tried out any of the exercises for this chapter?
Yes. Which one did I do? There was one, I can't remember. Oh, it was when he was talking about the credit card. I thought his example was silly, but the exercise I thought was kind of fun and was something I hadn't thought about before. God, what page even is that on? I'm never going to be able to find it. Oh, yeah. So it's Emotional Mastery 15, Failure and Defeat. Go to the middle of your manuscript, look at your protagonist, pick a moment of challenge, reckoning, betrayal, setback, or coming up short. For your protagonist, what's the worst part of this situation? What makes it excruciating? What makes it a personal failure? And then I put 3 stars next to the third bullet point, which is work backward in the story to set up the moment and why this particular kind of failure should hurt so much. Who is counting on your protagonist? Who is let down? What is the most painful way in which we can see that disappointment? And in the novel I'm writing, it's like a horror, and she's a parent, and the feels very much like her reaction, or the slowness of her reaction time, directly leads to like bad things happening with the antagonist, and those things having like results for her kids and the hot neighbor. And so I had a lot of fun trying to like parse what all that could look like to kind of deepen her character.
Nice. Anything you wish she would have gone into more or explained differently?
Enough time explaining.
That's right. We did say it was long. Any other last things you want to talk about? Any last takeaways or things that you were drawn to?
Overall, it really was a good chapter. Like, I do feel like we tend to like focus on the things we can argue about, but it's the same as like why we don't do book clubs for books we universally love. Of like, it's just easier to talk about those things. But
yeah, I really love this chapter. It's like definitely one of my favorites in the whole book. And I think I'm also noticing I'm reading Story Physics by Larry Brooks right now. And it has a lot of like, chapter 5 kind of stuff, but just with a little bit more of a, okay, but how does this work? Why does this work? In ways that I find a little more compelling than how Donald Maass explains it. So yeah, if you're like really into this and want a little bit more, I definitely recommend Larry Brooks's books. They do suffer a little bit from, if you've read one, you've read chunks of the others, but I still really like them.
Oh, and Griswold did try out a exercise. First 3 questions for number 13, bonding readers to your protagonist. I plan to go back to it. Yeah, I definitely like, I said it before earlier in the chat, I want to go to all these exercises when I am revising the first draft, because I think they're really good for finding direction for the emotional journey. And likes the bullet points on page 122 and the right now questions. Yeah, I thought that was a good distinction of his as well, to focus on the, okay, broadly, this is what's stopping them from doing the thing, but like right now, what is?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why can't they just talk about it? The eternal question.
Why can't they just communicate?
We actually were coming up on the end of the year, and we're going to finish this by the end of the year. So our next chat is the rest of the book. So I think it's about the same length, maybe just a little bit longer than chapter 5. So we're going to read to the end, and we'll talk about it on December the 8th. So that should be really fun. And then we will have read a whole craft book together.
Yeah, like note to self of like not reading it all on the last day again.
Right.
I thought I was gonna have more mental headspace this week, but yeah, I don't want to like be cramming it. So
yeah. So I'm excited. We've got some good chats coming up. We've got a writing next week. After that, we're going to talk about beta reading, then a write-in book club, and then holiday bake night, and then we're off for the end of the year, which is wild.
it really is.
Oh, we lost Leah.
Too wild for Leah.
She's gone. She's not even in the backstage. I don't know where she went. Oh. Yeah, I also read all of those chapters today. After warning people for weeks it was coming. Yeah. But I like it being fresh in my mind. I'll say
it did help. I was saying to Emma earlier, it gave me like Word Nerds of Old flashbacks of like, back then it was trying to finish the whole book, by the end of the day, but like panic reading the homework right before book club. It
Yeah,
brought me
yeah.
back.
That's part of why I wanted to do this just in segments.
Yeah.
Part of it was because I think it's fun to break it down, but part of it was we can all read one chapter in a day.
Yeah.
I did just start reading
Nice.
Till Death Do Us Bard at the bookshop
Oh,
the other day.
so shiny.
It is very much like inspired, in my opinion, by Geralt and
Nice.
Dandelion / Yaskier. I'm having a great time with it so far. It's like an adventurer who fights monsters and slays them has retired and settled down with his bard husband. And then the bard husband is getting caught up in something, and I think there's going to be a necromancer. I don't know. I'm having a good time so far.
Sounds delightful.
Yes, I spent way too much money at the bookstore this week. Like, bought so many books. But now I have all of my books for the rest of the year to get me to Christmas at least.
Leah's not coming back. Her internet died.
RIP. So far it hasn't been particularly comedic, but it is lighthearted. Belle asked if it was a comedy.
Can't think of the last book I read that was like, this is a comedy.
Yeah.
Hummus.
Oh, wait a second. Like, she lied. She came back.
Did we decide anything about TV night time?
We're still live.
Sorry. Thank you. Sorry about that, everyone.
We do on our own time watch television together.
In any case, thank you for watching. Thank you for joining us for our book club. We look forward to hearing your final thoughts on the book next time we meet, which is, Megan, did you already say?
December the 8th, we'll be back. You left
All
and
right.
I just started talking about the book I bought. So that's why we're still live. But yeah, the 8th, we'll talk about the end of the book. 6, 7 epilogue.
Excellent. Well, have a good week, everyone.
Yes, thank you for being here. And thanks to Leah for hosting. Bye.